going on, everyone? Hope you guys are doing well. Welcome to the video on bracing and what the brace is and how it works and how to do it. So this is going to be a three-part series. In this first part, I'm going to give a general overview, make it a little bit shorter, not diving fully into the depths of the technicalities of things. That way I can get this out to everyone. And then the successive part 2 and part 3 are going to be diving more into the depths of part 2 being kind of the physics and science of why the brace works and how it works. And then part 3 is going to be more diving into the execution side of things. So essentially, how can we implement this theory and this practical knowledge into our own throws? The first thing I want to get into is I want us to lay the foundation for where does this energy come from in our throw. So, we're throwing a disc. So we'll say, we have a 175 gram disc, and in my case, I'm trying to throw it, X amount of miles per hour. So I need to get kinetic energy into the disc, which is going to be accelerating a mass up to a velocity. But that energy has to come from somewhere. And all the people with, physics PhDs, please don't beat me up too much over this, because I'm going to give kind of an idealized, isolated system example to just sort of give a quick overview. But if we kind of view the system of our body and the disc as an isolated system, we have to store kinetic energy and generate kinetic energy in some way. So if we're doing a standstill throw, we're going to be actively pushing against the earth. And as weird as it sounds, if we were to take a zoomed out inertial frame of the whole thing, technically as we push into the earth, we're pushing the earth that way, which means that, the earth's moving that way, so momentum is conserved because we're pushing the disc this way. Now granted, the earth is a little bit heavier than us, so we're not going to notice, slowing down or speeding up the rotation if we're throwing east or west. But that's going to be a source of energy. So, the chemical energy that's stored in our body is going to get used to contract muscles, which is doing work, and work is essentially just force times distance. So if I apply a certain force over a certain distance, I'm generating, work energy, which is going to go into kinetic energy in the disc. And then in the case of an X step over 360, we get this added benefit where we're able to store kinetic energy in the form of forward motion with the body. And that's going to be a major source of energy for the throw that we're going to try to convert into kinetic energy in the disc. So we have these sources of energy, either in the form of stored kinetic energy in the body moving forward through our X step, or if it's more dominant from generating work energy during a standstill, we need to find a way to convert this into the disc. The issue is we have this huge, slow-moving body, and we got to move, a little 175 gram disc up to 65, 70, 75, 80, whatever speed, miles an hour we're trying to get to. So in my case, I'm like 200 pounds, which is like 90 kilograms. So 90,000 grams of mass in my body. And this is a 175 gram disc. So I'm like 520 times as massive as the disc, which is like, a mass ratio of over 500. In catapulting and trebuchet, which I did a lot back in the day, we refer to that as mass ratio, which is basically the counterweight's mass divided by the projectile's mass. But I have this big, slow moving body. How the heck am I going to get this disc going 70 or 75 miles an hour when the fastest man in the world, Usain Bolt, his fastest sprinting speed linearly was 27 or 28 miles an hour? And that's kind of where the magic of the brace comes in, because it allows us to convert basically relatively slow linear kinetic energy into very fast linear kinetic energy of the disc, along with some rotational kinetic energy because of the spin. And the easiest way to do that is to use rotation of the body to pull the arm along very fast. So if I were to just throw my body this way and try to just heave my torso to the right, it would be very hard to generate high velocities into the disc. But if I rotate my hips and my shoulders follow as a result, I can get this very, very efficient slinging action where I store up some elastic energy in the tissues of the arm and also the trunk. And then I'm going to harvest a lot of that energy and transfer it into the disc at the end of the throw. And the example I want to show for this is a trebuchet I built back in the day, one of the many advanced trebuchet designs that I had messed with. And this particular one is called a whipper because it goes through 270 degrees of arm rotation, at least before release. But this was something that was basically throwing a baseball that weighed 1/3 of a pound using a counterweight that weighed 30 to 40 pounds. And I want to show that, I'm going to put it up on the screen so that you can see we're converting this relatively slow but massive counterweight's potential energy and kinetic energy as it falls into rotation of the entire implement, or at least of the entire apparatus of the trebuchet with its throwing arm and sling. And then at the end, that sling uncoils, the radius of curvature increases, which allows the projectile to rapidly accelerate. And then you'll see when I show the video that the counterweight decelerates very, very quickly at the bottom as that kinetic energy is transferred into the ball in that trebuchet. And that's very similar to what happens if you look at super slow-mos of, top distance throwing pros. You'll see their hips accelerate and rotate, their shoulders follow, and then as the disc uncoils and slings out, the hips and the shoulders decelerate massively, and that's because a lot of that energy stored inside of those parts of the body are being harvested and transferred into the disc at release. So how do we attain this rapid rotation of the body if, I've looked at videos and from here to here, for example, is on an 80 to 85 mile an hour throw. This is only about 10 milliseconds. So it's about a 100th of a second. I can't physically contract my muscles to move any joint that fast. So the easiest way to do this is to rotate the pelvis as viewed from above, looking down at the transverse plane, which I'll throw a graphic up on the screen for. So if we're viewing from above the transverse plane, we're gonna have clockwise rotation of the pelvis. And I'll show my friend Clint, AKA Blitz Disc Golf on YouTube. He has this really cool top view of him throwing like a 74 mile an hour standstill, which is insane, by the way. And you'll see that clockwise rotation of the pelvis that is initiating the throw. So there's a shift and then there's a clockwise rotation of the pelvis. And the entire trunk, pretty much from here up to here, is gonna have what I call a quasi-isometric muscle contraction, which just means the muscles are kind of just hanging on and we're generating that X factor between the hips and the shoulders. We're storing elastic energy in all the connective tissues that go up basically through the core and from the pelvis up to the shoulder structure, basically the shoulder complex up top, through the spine, through the rib cage, up through the shoulders. So by initiating with that pelvic rotation, we're able to then transfer up the kinetic chain into the shoulders, and then we're able to attain a very fast shoulder rotation that pulls the arm along and allows us to have that energy harvest at the end of the throw. But I still haven't answered the question of how do we attain this fast rotation, and that is where we enter the brace, which I think the terminology of the brace is kind of interesting because typically in throwing sports like baseball, discus, shot put, javelin throwing, it's called the block, which is the same exact concept, but just a different word. And I'm assuming the word brace in disc golf is used because if we kind of look at it from the side, it has this L-shaped brace appearance where we almost have like this L brace against the ground that's halting our forward momentum. So I think it's interesting that we call it the brace. But if I show you guys videos up on the screen of a javelin thrower, a baseball pitcher, a discus thrower, a shot putter, they're all gonna be using the same mechanic. It's just rotated in a slightly different plane of movement, but it's the same exact concept. Okay, so to give a quick overview of kind of how the brace is functioning from a physics and biomechanics perspective, I'm gonna use the idealized example of just a standard X step where I'm gonna move as a right-handed thrower from left to right as I'm moving linearly. So as I move through my X step footwork, I have linear kinetic energy in that direction. Stored in my body, it's moving relatively slow. But if I plant my right leg into the ground in such a fashion that I have dynamic balance, which means the force vector coming up from the ground pushes against my center of mass in such a way that it's going to halt my rightward movement in the direction of the target. So if I plant in this direction, and you'll even see them plant to the forward, especially on high power throws, you'll see people plant to the right, but also a little bit in front. When that foot lands, if we're just kind of looking at it from Newton's third law of motion, where if you apply any force to something, it will apply an opposite and equal reaction back to you. My right foot is planting into the ground. I'm activating my hip and my quad and all the other muscles to extend into the ground. The ground reaction force that comes back up as an equal and opposite reaction And I'll throw in a graphic where you can see this from the top. I'll probably show Clint's video again. The projection of that force vector onto the transverse plane is going to induce clockwise rotation on my pelvis, because there's a ground reaction force that's partially vertical, which is dealing with the gravitational forces, and it's balancing and halting my forward momentum, but it's also pushing my pelvis into clockwise rotation very rapidly. And that in essence is what the brace is it's allowing us to convert this horizontal movement into very rapid rotational movement of the pelvis, which is going to allow us to elastically rotate the shoulders and the arm, which is going to accelerate the disc through the finish. And the rear leg does contribute a little bit in the brace and the finish of the throw. In the case of an X step, the rear leg isn't going to do quite as much as the front leg, because the knee extensors and hip extensors, aka the quadricep and the glute, are able to produce that massive ground reaction force that comes back up through the leg and pushes the pelvis into that clockwise rotation. The rear leg is not going to do as much. We do kind of get that turn in where we're able to basically internally rotate the femur and push off the toes a little bit, which also helps to push the left side of the pelvis into that clockwise motion and get it back, balanced up onto the front leg. But the rear leg doesn't contribute quite as much in an X step as it does in a standstill throw. I could even show a video where I'm throwing 76 miles an hour from an X step with very little internal rotation of the rear leg. And then more recently 77 miles an hour, so 1 mile an hour faster from an X step with much more internal rotation from the rear leg. So it's gonna matter a lot more on the standstill, but as the X step speed increases, the rear leg's gonna contribute less, because we get dynamically balanced onto the front leg so rapidly when we plant. This left foot comes off the ground, and it's really just something that's aiding in hip rotation from the inertial forces that it provides, but it's not gonna do quite as much as the big muscles on the right side of the body. And before I kind of wrap up this general overview of the brace, I want to mention that how the brace looks and how it feels is gonna vary a lot from person to person and from throw to throw. I would say, as a general rule of thumb, if you're doing an X step and when you plant your plant foot into the ground, if you have any slowing of your body's linear velocity towards the target line, if your velocity in that direction, in the case of a right-handed thrower for me, slows down at all, you are bracing to some extent, because you are bracing up against that front leg to aid in rotation of the body efficiently on that front leg. So whether you come to a complete standstill, like in some Ken Jarvis example I'll show on the video right now, a guy like him who that works perfectly for him, or you're someone who likes to kind of carry through the brace a little bit more, like a James Conrad, kind of hard to argue with someone that won a world championship. It's going to be different for everyone, but if there is any slowing of rotation and it allows you to throw with more power, you are bracing, so don't overly stress about how it looks necessarily. Of course, we can always strive to improve on things, but there's going to be a lot of nuance and a lot of individuality to it. All right, I'm going to sign off the video here before it gets too long-winded like my videos usually do. So I appreciate you guys stopping by and checking it out. And please do subscribe. I really invite you to subscribe so you can be notified when my part 2 and part 3 explanations come out, because I think those are also going to be hopefully super useful for you guys. And again, if you want any coaching help for your backhand form or your fitness programming, I still have a few openings to bring on clients for that. So please drop me an email and I'll be happy to get in touch with you and help you out. So thanks again for watching, guys, and I'll see you next time.